Do you think that Trinidad is ready for another Tobagonian to be leader of the country?
I think this country is ready for a leader.
In an unprecedented all-access interview, regionally renowned journalist and media personality Julian Rogers goes on a one-on-one with a principal figure and one of the most enduring names in Trinidad and Tobago politics and government, leader of the opposition People's National Movement. Dr. Keith Christopher Rowley opens up in the beginning of one of the most crucially pivotal and media-sensitized election campaigns in local political history.
When I became leader of the PNM in 2010, an application was put in. And that application was for the job of Prime Minister of Trinidad and Tobago.
Questions on land date.
What clearly would have been the hurt that came in the acquisitions in the land date affair?
Questions on his growing up.
Which one were you good at?
I was good at both. The police came looking for me, but I was in Trinidad.
His reactions to recent accusations about his family.
One member of parliament has clearly gone over the limit.
The allegations about me personally.
Life in opposition.
When we're in opposition, we don't just disintegrate.
The economy.
What is really required is for greater involvement of the private sector.
On the state of the Republic.
The vast majority of people in Trinidad and Tobago are decent, right-thinking citizens.
His reputation.
So your integrity is your most valuable asset?
Yes, and I will defend it to the hilt.
In 1 hour with Julian Rogers and
the political leader of the People's National Movement, Dr. Keith Rowley.
He joins us now. Dr. Rowley, welcome. First of all, let's understand where you come from. There's a sense that you are really, truly drawn out of Tobago. And there's a sense that Tobago is a fashioner of people of a different ilk from Trinidad. Is that a fair comment?
With all positives to that, I would say yes. I'm a village boy from Basin Hall in Tobago, grew up in Basin Hall in the 60s. And the values of that era, I think, have served me quite well. Grounding in religion and in the school place, where certain values were instilled in you. And I think those values are, enduring. I was raised by my grandparents and largely by the community. It was the time where a child in that village was largely a child of the village. So while you lived under the roof of your guardian or parent, once you were awake, you were the responsibility of the community. So I had to be on the lookout for everybody who was on the lookout for me.
And you could expect to get a spanking from somebody in the village?
Oh, you didn't only expect to, you got it from time to time. Everybody took responsibility. It wasn't an era where people just focused on what is in it for me or you were only about yourself. It was about community.
As you talk about adults, I want to ask you about the influences, say, in your primary school, a school teacher, a headmaster, that kind of thing.
The school I went to was Mason Hall Government Primary. And before my time, that school was known as Ben Seeley School. Ben Seeley was a headmaster before my time. And then in my time, it was Charles Baird. Charles Baird was the headmaster. And the school was known as Mr. Baird's School. And Mr. Baird was this fatherly figure to all of us. And we all respected him, and he took responsibility for us.
So that was primary school.
Yes.
The next stage?
I went to Bishop's High School in Tobago, which is an Anglican school. And I did my O-levels and A-levels there. In my sixth form year, I was head boy of that school. And I was involved in academic stuff and a lot of sports. I mean, we really played a lot of sports, football and cricket. And
which one were you good at?
I was good at both. I played for the school team, cricket and football. We played in the adult league. So on weekends, we'd play cricket against the men. And that's what I grew up doing.
Now that's Tobago upbringing. I'm curious about the Trinidad upbringing.
My mother lived in Laventille. I'll come here off and on for vacation, at August time. And since I was about 7 years old, I would come spend a few weeks until I was like about early teens. But my mother would come to Tobago every Easter and every Christmas. So we had that kind of relationship. And they were all vacations to look forward to, either my mother coming or my coming down here. And then eventually, when I moved to live in Trinidad in 1970, I lived with my mother for a little while. By that time, my mother had moved to Mova. So I lived in Mova with my mother late 69 into 70. And in those days, Mova was an exciting place to live in.
When did you decide to go to university? What happened?
Well, I decided to go to university not really understanding what was involved. I had to have a scholarship because my parents and grandparents couldn't afford to fund my way in to university. Turned out I won the Sylvan Bowl Scholarship at Bishop's, which was a single scholarship that was available to the top student each academic year. And I won that scholarship, but the information didn't come on time for me to register in 1969. So I went to work, and I worked as a teacher, and then I entered UWI, and I wanted to do geography. And to do that, I had to go on to the Mona campus. And I eventually got in at the Mona campus, and I was transported with ticket in hand only. And I arrived on Mona campus with, basically as a ward, because the paperwork was not in place yet. And for 2 weeks, I was a ward of the Pro Vice Chancellor. And that served me in good stead because I got to know all the people who mattered in Mona in that 2-week period. And then I was placed in Irving Hall, which incidentally is the same hall that Mr. Manning was. I got the day after he graduated. And Irving Hall had a lot of Trinidad and Tobago students.
Why geography?
I always had a tremendous interest in world affairs. And as a student in high school, geography was the area that stimulated me the most, places and people. So I really love and I still like geography. I still buy lots of geography books and read them. And I've studied a lot of areas in my development.
But a lot of children of your time, and certainly of our time in generally, would have been encouraged and a little cajoled by their parents to go for something like law or medicine, etc. Did you have that kind of pressure?
Not pressure, but we always were led to believe that if you became a doctor or a lawyer, then you would have done as well as you could have. But I never really considered doing that. Incidentally, my first professional ambition was to be a journalist. And I really focused on English and English literature. And I thought I had done the exam really, really well with getting a distinction, and then, I almost failed it. And that just jolted me. And I turned away from my ambition to be a journalist, and I focused on my sciences. So I ended up doing botany, zoology, and geography for A-levels. So when I went to university, I then chose geography and botany, and I added geology. And then I went on to graduate as a geologist.
Now that's your first degree. Next step?
Well, after I graduated, I came straight back home, and I was invited to get involved in research work at the Seismic Research Unit with Dr. John Tomlin, who was head of that department. I had done my bachelor's field project on Tobago in 1972 as part of the requirement for my bachelor's degree. And I did that under supervision at Seismic here in Trinidad. And so when I graduated, they wanted me to continue with them as a research student, working on volcano in St. Vincent. I went there, I spent 2 weeks with my friends, climbed the volcano a couple of times and just fell in love with the place. And I became an honorary Vincentian since. And that was 1973. And I worked in St. Vincent as a research student all the way to my PhD, and ended up knowing St. Vincent as almost as good as I know Tobago. And as fate would have it, I graduated with my PhD in 1978, August, and the following year, July, the volcano erupted. So all my friends around the world called me up and said, well, Rowley, we can know what nonsense you've been talking because it's written in your thesis, and the volcano is erupting. And I spent quite some time there monitoring the volcano after the evacuation, working with my seniors and the government of St. Vincent. And by that time I was on staff at UWI, because after I finished my master's, I was offered a position on faculty at UWI at seismic research. So I joined the staff there as a junior research fellow, and I moved up to research fellow, and eventually I became head of that department, and had these good experiences.
Let's talk about your political education. Where did that begin?
My political education began in 1970 when I was a teacher at Arima Government Secondary, and it was the era of the Black Power movement with what was then the university students led by Geddes Granger. And I got very involved in that, largely through a fellow Bishop's High School friend of mine called Anthony McFarlane, who was a student involved in the Sir George William University problem in Canada, where West Indian students were fighting racism. And they came back here educating us about the need to challenge the status quo, because there were certain remnants of the colonial era which had to be challenged. Not meaning to hurt or harm anyone, but meaning to complete the liberation that had come with independence. And I got myself involved in listening to the lectures of these people and actually participating in talking to people about it. And I first spoke to an audience at Jogi Road in Sawa on this issue as an NJAC person. And I never joined a party. NJAC wasn't a party, it was just people getting together. And you followed the leadership, whatever that was. And in the end, we found out that the leadership was very amorphous. But those of us who believe in the need for change and real, meaningful change to open the door for real development and progress, we felt that we had to be on board. And I always felt that if I had a point of view to express in my country, I should be able to express it without fear. And I did that in 1970. We were out speaking on platforms, and we got news that Gordon Grant Hardware was on fire. And we knew, well, that was big trouble. We knew nothing about it, but NJAC could be blamed, and trouble was coming. So we had to stay up all night in a restaurant to make sure that we had a perfect alibi. And the next day, I was at my grandfather's house, and I got a long lecture from my grandfather as to where I was heading. And he virtually instructed me to go back to Trinidad, to my mother's place. They came looking for me. The police came looking for me, but I was in Trinidad, having left there the night before. And I think that scared me. And then a lot of people were picked up and put in, or jailed for that period. And I had to reflect on what was happening. I didn't want to end my ambition of becoming more
Activist?
Not so much an activist. I had an idea that what I wanted for my life. And had I been stymied at that stage, I would have been disappointed. I really wanted to go to university. So that was April, and by October, I was on the campus in Mona. And I never took part in any campus politics.
You were that scared?
I don't think I was scared. I would say I was focused. I was focused on getting my degree. I wanted to get a degree and to get a good degree. I had a yearning to go as far as I could, being educated. I wanted to be, not just get certified, I wanted to be educated.
But this was also a period of ascendancy in terms of Dr. Eric Williams. His writings, his politics, his policies in terms of government, etc. What impact did that have on you? Did it create at that stage a PNM person? Looking
for this education, I could not help but focus on what Dr. Williams himself had done here in Trinidad and Tobago. And while in 1970, I might have been a young, hot-headed person, I was able at university to read what Dr. Williams wrote and realize that right here in Trinidad and Tobago, we had somebody who understood what I was striving for, which is an understanding of this whole thing. So the Franz Fanon and the C.L.R. James and that kind of writing, Frederick Douglass. And you understand that I didn't have to look too far. And I became a student of Dr. Williams very privately. In 1974, my friend John Scott who was a geologist, who was kind of mentoring me when I came back here. He was a member of the PNM, a very high-ranking person at the constituency level. And I remember one day we had the normal conversation of politics, and he just got fed up with me and said, listen, I don't want to hear anything from you. I don't want to hear anything else from you. You seem to have all the answers, but you got an education, and if you want to get involved to help, do so, but no more talk. And I was kind of pulled up in that way. And he said, well, why don't you join the party? And I joined the PNM in Tunapuna in 1974.
Was there a family influence in terms of your politics? I mean, let's say, was your mother politically active?
My mother was a staunch PNM supporter here in Trinidad, and lots of her friends from a place called Coverdale Circular Road and St. Joseph Road. There were lots of people who lived in those areas who my mother knew, and they were all very staunch PNM supporters, and they virtually worshipped Dr. Williams. And my mother was a beneficiary, and very much how public policy changed my life. Her life was changed as well. And she moved from a very humble residence in the Laventille area. In fact, she started out from Tobago in the John John area, then moved high up in Laventille, and then she moved to Coconut Drive in Morvan, where she lived until she passed away. So she appreciated how public policy changed her life. And like that generation, they didn't only accept it as a right, but appreciated that their lives were changed by these public policies.
Listening to you talk about your early political influences seemed to suggest that you also were ready and particularly influenced far earlier.
I can recall being taken to public meetings where the spokespersons were Butler, Louis Rostand, Dr. Williams, APT James. I would go with my grandfather at nights, and those are the days when the men would go to public meetings and you had to wear a jacket. And my grandfather would put on his khaki jacket and his felt hat and take me to these meetings. And Mason Hall is a little cold at night, so I'll be under his jacket with my hand in his jacket pocket and watching these people speak. And I guess maybe I was impressed and wanted to be a platform speaker myself.
You contested the poll first time and you lost. Tell us what led up to that.
Well, that was the best election I ever got involved in, I must say. I was living in West Moorings at the time, and the election was called. George Chambers was the Prime Minister, and it was soon after Dr. Williams died. And I think the sudden passing of Dr. Williams had a tremendous effect on people like me. And here I was in Trinidad being told that they couldn't find a candidate for Tobago West. I wasn't married, I didn't have much responsibility right around me and so on. And they asked me to come to Tobago and run for the seat. And I locked up my apartment and I went to Tobago. And with a handful of PNM activists in Tobago, we ran a satellite campaign. And we ran that campaign like you wouldn't believe. And we came within a hair's breadth of winning that seat.
That big loss, that 33-3 loss to the NAR back then. Talk about that period though, because that was a you call it a mauling, obviously a very serious pounding for the party. How did the party survive and then revive?
The party, it was a tremendously traumatic period for the party, but the PNM was a tremendous foundation. The PNM is not an election day machine. The PNM's strength lies in its roots in the communities, where we have in every constituency party groups, executives, and people who are committed to the organization. So when the PNM loses an election, in the eyes of others, that's the party, but that really is the government. The party is elsewhere. And after that mauling of 33-3, while the party was deflated, the spirit was not broken. We met at Balizé House every month to conduct our general council meeting. Party groups conducted their meeting and their business. Constituency executives were elected. And so the structure was there. We were in opposition. I served in the first opposition of the PNM. And we acknowledge that this is a place that we can also function. And in Dr. Williams' own writings and statements, he mentioned that the PNM is prepared for government or opposition. So here it was, it fell to us in opposition to ensure that the foundation that was laid allowed the party to regenerate. It was a period when Mr. Manning had to make decisions that were not popular because the incumbents who had just lost the seat, many of them had greater political stocks than Mr. Manning. But Mr. Manning had to make the decisions looking ahead and not assuaging the feelings of today. Certain people had to be told no, and certain people had to be invited in. It was very much like now, it was a transitional period. And you had to have the confidence that what you were doing was what the circumstances require, and the fruits will be borne out in the end. And that happened. I was very pleased to have been part of that. I worked, that is where I got this reputation of being aggressive and being whatever you call me. But the bottom line is, when you're down 33-3, there ain't much time to be peepsy and whatever. You just had to take it on head on. And I was in the forefront of that.
I want to ask you if at that point, what was your ambition?
My ambition was to see if we could have coped with the problems that we met. And problem number one was that we were in an IMF program. A lot of people forget that. When the PNM came in 1991, Trinidad and Tobago was under an IMF program. And our first order of business was to get the country out of that program. And once we got out of that program, we then would have had the freedom to make do with what we have, but make do on our terms in terms of priorities and the extent to which we did A or B without being under the control of IMF public servants who would dictate to us their priorities, which may not have been the country's priorities. And we got that done.
In some cases, people say, Rowley is a brave champion, he's a fighter, he's many things. Then others will say, Rowley, he is shy, he is quiet, he's aloof, etc. It's almost like you go into a gallery and put up several pictures of Dr. Rowley. Which one would it be?
I think I'm all those things, depending on where I'm located. On the political platform, I'm aggressive. On issues, particularly issues of wider national import, I'm a champion. I like to believe that I speak for many people who can't speak for themselves. And I also speak for myself and my family and my community, because these are issues that need to be dealt with. And when I speak passionately about them, because I believe in what I say and do. I believe in it. So I have no difficulty articulating it. I wouldn't say I'm shy, but I say I'm quiet in normal circumstances. And if I'm in certain kinds of environment, I could even get boisterous, raucous. It all depends, animated. It all depends on where I am. The people who play cricket and football with me would never call me shy. But then I can switch out of that and become focused. I like to read. I read a lot. I love books. I don't like Kindles. I like to turn pages and smell the pages. But when I'm doing that, I don't like interventions. I don't like to be disturbed. I can be short. But the people who are my friends, they're the ones who know me best. Unfortunately for me, a lot of people who only know me on the political platform, that's all they know of me.
Do you think that would be a problem for those people who don't know you and who must vote for you and the party?
Well, it's not so much a problem for them. I think it's a problem for me, because if I want them to give me the responsibility of running their affairs, they need to know who this person is, and they need to be comfortable with that person. So it falls to me, the PNM, and all those who are sponsoring me to ensure that people know as much about me as they can. I can't expect to lead the country and tell people elect somebody you don't know. But incidentally, I've been in public life. This year will be, 36 years? And I've been around long enough. I haven't just suddenly appeared from out of the woodwork and say, look, I want to be Prime Minister, or I want to be a Minister of Government. I would like to ask people to judge me on not what my opponents say I should be or what they'd like me to be, but on my record. I have a record that I'm very proud of, and it's a record that can stand scrutiny. I've held high office. I've been a Minister of Government in the Ministry of Agriculture, in trade, in housing, and I've had to interact with the population of one kind or another. The business community, the agricultural community, the university environment. I was head of a department. And I would like people to use that as the yardstick of measuring me with public office.
People hold a lot of store in that personal contact. Yes, you say you're good at it, but the portrayal may be defeating your impression or your image of yourself.
Well, I can't prevent people from portraying me in a particular way. What I can do is try to live a normal, decent life. And that will be assessed with or without malice. In terms of my interaction with people, it is the people who have had the opportunity to interact with me who will speak more accurately about me. Unfortunately, the vast majority of the electorate, unfortunately for me, the vast majority of the electorate hasn't had that opportunity because it's not feasible for them to interact with me at that level, to have a drink with me in a rum shop or to be with me in a curry goat lime somewhere or in a cricket ground somewhere, or that sort of thing. So it's a smaller amount of the population. But I'm now reaching out to the wider population who are expected to assess me based on my portrayals as far as they have been. And I'm competing for office. I don't expect my opponents to portray me as the best thing since sliced bread. What I don't expect is for them to portray me as Barabbas. However, an election campaign and a political life is all about selling yourself to the electorate and hoping to convince them that they could repose their trust in you.
How do you take it, though?
I take it on the chin. I have taken it for decades. Some people have gone over the limit. But in the political arena, one has to expect that some people can go over the limit. But as somebody said, it says more about them than it says about me.
In recent times, one member of parliament has clearly gone over the limit if we're to judge by the reaction. How do you take that?
There are two aspects of that struck me more than any other. The allegations about me personally, that has been dispensed with. As you would have seen, the victim of this supposed violation was able, fortunately for me, to speak for herself. But I really, really felt hurt for my family, especially my father, who passed away 36 years ago. And to hear that kind of characterization of my father, and to bring immediately all my brothers and their children and their nieces and nephews into wanting to accept on the part of that individual that our father and their grandfather and their uncle and whoever he was to them was this beast. That really, really hurt me. And I've been thinking about it ever since, how my father would have reacted if he was alive to hear someone accuse him of such a heinous crime. My mother, I think, would have taken it in stride, because my mother might have been able to speak for herself in a way that might have surprised many people. And secondly, I thought as a Tobagonian that we were let down as a people, that one of us could have fallen so low for whatever advantage anticipated to have fabricated this story, but total disregard for the hurt that it would bring, not just to me, but to such a wide cross-section of people. I mean, I'm not surprised that the reaction across the country has been what it is, because it is my feeling, it is my view, it is my expectation that the vast majority of people in Trinidad and Tobago are decent, right-thinking citizens who want this place to be a decent place, to be properly run by people who they can trust with authority. And this was just a national letdown. I don't know that this is ever going to go away. Where did this hate come from? Where did this indecency come from? And I think we are let down as a people.
As you talk about that pain, can I ask you about what clearly would have been the hurt that came in the accusations in the land aid affair? Some people may want to raise that at the height of this campaign as this is politics.
Personally, I didn't really feel any hurt for myself in land aid. I was concerned about my wife, because until recently, my wife had not even appeared anywhere in the political arena. She'd only accompany me to a convention at the time, if it's a convention, to present candidates. Other than that, my wife stayed completely out of the political arena and raised her 2 children largely without me being there as I should have been, because my time was being consumed in matters political. And many people didn't even know my wife. But since I became leader of the PNM, she got a little more involved. And I'm very grateful to her for that. But land aid was an investment that was done by my wife. And it was, from day one, there were no questions to answer. But allegations were made in Parliament by a member of Parliament. And if I'm a member of Parliament and I was a member of the cabinet, allegations were made of that nature. They had to be investigated. So I had no problem with that. What I had a problem with was the way the investigation was going. There was a commission of inquiry. My name was called by one accuser, who up to this day on a radio station continues to accuse me. One accuser with a political complexion made the accusations, and there was a commission of inquiry. And the next thing I knew, even though I was identified and accused, this inquiry was going to be closed without me being allowed to have my say. I had to send my lawyer to the inquiry to demand that I appear before this inquiry so as to be cross-examined so that the truth could come out. And that was done, and the inquiry concluded. But it concluded with a very interesting statement. And the statement was this: whatever Dr. Rowley did showed a lack of discretion. Let me repeat it. A commission of inquiry that was charged with the responsibility of finding out what went on, particularly exactly how did Keith Rowley, the minister, misconduct himself. And the finding was, whatever Dr. Rowley did showed a lack of discretion. I took issue with that. What do you mean by whatever? And I dismissed it for what it represented. A situation where you could find nothing to convict me, but the assignment was convict Rowley.
So your integrity is your most valuable asset?
Yes, and I will defend it to the hilt.
The issues on the campaign trail, what would you say is number one?
Governance. The number one issue on this campaign is whether this country is being properly governed. And this covers all areas of management activity. One can pick out specifics, specific failures, specific issues of success, but it falls down to governance. Are we doing as good as we can?
Can you be specific?
Okay, we have some issues as a country to deal with, not the least of which is accounting for the country's resources. Corruption as a way of life in and out of the government. National security, industrial expansion, infrastructural development. It's all there. I mean, we have a gridlock, a traffic problem in the country with no solution being advanced, no solution in sight. We're paying more and more for health services and getting less and less health care. We're spending more and more on education, getting less and less educated people, more and more frustrated young people with not too much of an improved hope of getting a job commensurate with their skills. People are coming out of University of Trinidad and Tobago and elsewhere, settling for OJT jobs. We have to have an approach to expanding the economy to create opportunity for these people so that they can be properly employed, commensurate with their skills. That means that the government of the day has to not just spend money and tell you how much they spend, but effectively expand the economy.
But Dr. Rowley, very often in a political campaign, such as you're going to conduct, there's always a pointing towards the same list of items that you just laid out on the table. What makes your proposed government's approach different?
Two things. One, a PNM government would represent a stable platform from which to launch the initiatives to address these issues. These pickup sides have a way of coming into office with a great fanfare, lovely election campaign, win a lot of seats. But there's a big difference between the wedding and the living. The wedding is a one-day affair. The living is what follows after. The PNM's foundation, or political stability, offers this country its best chance to have the policy prescriptions advanced and to succeed. Secondly, on this occasion, like previous occasions, the leadership in the PNM is not a leadership that's subject to the buffeting of the passing winds, where you have to do things that are clearly wrong to please the flavor of the day. We can do what is right and be held accountable for our actions. That's a PNM trait. It comes from a strong political party, and the country expects of the PNM a certain standard of performance, and we hope to deliver that on every occasion. Now, in my own case, my experience as a parliamentarian, as a minister of government in many portfolios, as a person who's been through the political fireplace, coming from Mason Hall in Tobago, through the university, through state enterprises, through the constituency of Dago Martin West, all the way to the corridors of the IDB and the CDB. I think I bring to bear the benefits of that experience so that I could be balanced, I could be level-headed in managing people and affairs. I can manage a crisis. I've managed crises before, when people's lives are involved, and therefore that experience is now available to the people of Trinidad and Tobago in the office of Prime Minister.
Would you be surprised to know that some people fear you?
No. What I would want to know is the basis of that fear.
They say you're a tough man, you're a brave man, you are prepared to fight all the demons, so to speak. Should they be afraid of you or see that as a strength?
I would want them to see that as a strength. And to the extent that I'm seen that way, it is not for me to act in a way that people should fear what I might do with authority. Some people call it power. I call it authority. If I am portrayed as a person who would handle authority recklessly, I would simply want to ask fellow citizens, what is the basis of that? I have had authority, and to the best of my knowledge, my record would show that I have not handled authority recklessly. And that's the best recommendation. And in terms of fear, whether it is based on religious grounds, racial grounds, social grounds, I have come from a village where I went to school without shoes like many others, but I didn't envy those who had shoes. I took advantage of the opportunity to rise above that and to walk with those who had shoes. I was baptized as a Methodist. I was raised by Seventh-day Adventists. I was educated by the Anglicans. I married a Catholic, and I've raised 2 Catholic children in my household and my wife. In my management period, I managed a department in the university where people of all persuasions fell under my management. I managed Caroni Limited as Minister of Agriculture. I had responsibility for the nation's lands which are populated largely by persons of East Indian descent. I was Minister of Trade and Industry, interfacing with the business community. I was Minister of Housing, creating and distributing houses. I defy anybody in this country to truthfully come forward and say, during that sojourn, through those assignments, that there is any record of me acting irresponsibly, recklessly, or unfairly.
Undecideds, people who are on the margin, so to speak, people sitting on the fence, trying to decide whether they should support you or support another party. How do you address those people's uncertainty?
By telling them that they need to participate in the process. Not participating in the process is not really the best way of treating with the problems. Cynicism has never generated a theory, has never created an equation that worked. If you are a citizen of this country, you have a responsibility to either participate or choose not to participate. But understand something, whatever we are, what's and all, it is the people of Trinidad and Tobago from whom the government will arise. And the government itself is but a microcosm of the people. Nobody's going to come from Mars charging over the cliff on white or black steeds to save us. No cavalry is going to come from the United States to save us. We, the people, have to generate our own leaders. And it is what is available that we have to deal with. It is for the undecideds to determine which grouping or individual gives the location, the constituency, or the party the best chance to make the best of the opportunity available to us now.
Dr. Rowley, very often people talk about the makeup of the populace of Trinidad and Tobago as an amalgam. But yet, there are persistent thoughts that the politics of this country really is tribal, in that you got one set of people voting for one political party and another group, major group, voting for the other. Do you believe that?
Yes, I don't run away from the fact that one can identify a particular group of people who make up the base of any political party in this country.
But do you see it as a tribe?
As a tribe? Yeah. It can be called a tribe where tribe means a group.
But some people suggest that this tribe is a negative connotation. In other words, they see it along racial lines.
In Trinidad and Tobago, the groupings can be seen along geographical lines, racial lines, religious lines, or class lines. These are all divisions you can identify. So one can get these groupings. Yes, it is a fact that the base support, which traditionally will support the PNM and has done so, even in the 33-3 era, comes from the urban area in Trinidad and Tobago. And the urban areas in this country are populated largely by persons of Afro-Trinidadian origin. And other parties, the UNC, the DLP, the political party came out of a union which was in the rural area doing agriculture, which was largely populated by the East Indians. So this is a reality. It is not uncommon for a block of people to form the base of a political party. Let's take the MSJ. If the MSJ becomes successful and mobilizes the labor movement, that would be its base support. So the base support is to be acknowledged. It is not to be exploited to create division and disharmony. We cannot run away from the fact that, let's take the PNM. We are grateful for the fact that we've had support across this country. Between 1956 and now, the PNM has won seats across Trinidad and Tobago. There are only two places in Trinidad and Tobago where the PNM had not lost. It's Buku Lambo in Tobago and Laventille, San Fernando East, three places. San Fernando East, Laventille, and Buku Lambo in Tobago. At various times in various elections, the PNM would have been rejected. The other political party, the UNC, there are areas in Trinidad and Tobago where they have never lost because their supporters, rain or shine, hell or high water, they voted for the UNC or the DLP or some equivalent. So people have voted largely because there's this real under-perception that politics is about interests. And some people believe that it's only their kind who can properly represent their interest. That is a reality. And the politics as advocated of harmony in the national community has to supersede that. We don't go out there and tell people that only the PNM looks after your interests. We talk about the interests of Trinidad and Tobago. That's why our party is called the People's National Movement. And our documents, you'll see it says, we're not a party in the ordinary sense of the word. Rather, we are a rally for all. So we're not going to be pigeonholed into saying that we are an East-West corridor party or we're an Afro-based party. No. We have always been, and we continue to be, a people's national movement. We have put up candidates in every seat, in every election, whether it is general election, local election, THA election, or by-election, there's a PNM candidate. Other political parties can't say that.
Yeah. Which brings me to two comments that I picked up as I move around the country talking to people about whether Dr. Rowley is a possible Prime Minister of Trinidad and Tobago. One comment was, Dr. Rowley is too black to be Prime Minister. Another one, Dr. Rowley is a racist. How do you feel when you hear things like that?
I feel disappointed that there are people in 2015 who could even advance that as an argument to be treated seriously. This is 2015. Eric Williams has been dead for 34 years. There's a black man in the White House in America. Nelson Mandela has been freed, lived, and died. And anybody in Trinidad and Tobago who believes that my skin color should be the basis on which I should be judged to hold any office, or any person should be judged on the basis of their skin color, it says more about how backward that person is than it says about me. But I simply want to say that I have always been very comfortable in my skin. And in fact, because of the existence of that kind of thinking, which still exists in some quarter, I have been chastened to conduct myself in such a way that I don't bring that kind of justification that black people are this or black people are that. I take a pride in being a proud black man because I know that I am charged with a responsibility to kill off that kind of commentary.
Including the charges of racism?
Well, again, a person who would want to describe me as a person who ought to be taken in the context of my color, the next logical step is to invoke racism. But what is the basis for such a development? What have I ever spoken, written, or done in my life to support that statement? But fears based on race or religion usually don't require proof. It's just a feeling. And unfortunately, or should I say fortunately, that sentiment is not very widespread in Trinidad and Tobago, but it does exist.
In the Trinidad and Tobago context, you look to the future now and the possibilities of leading this country to new growth. Where do you see the private sector playing a specific role and government as well?
What is really required is for greater involvement of the private sector with government support, where the government being in a position to invest or to create the environment in which the private sector expands its interests in terms of manufacturing, investment in industry, and tourism, and so on, and going even further in assisting the government in developing infrastructure. So the government and the private sector working together in Trinidad and Tobago is a real good combination. On the private sector on its own tends to be a little timid without the government. The government on its own can become wasteful and bureaucratic. But together, with proper transparency and accountability, it would be a tremendous force.
Can you be specific about the kinds of things you would like to see the private sector do?
Well, there are things that the government would want done in the country, which would give the country a better chance of succeeding towards our objectives. For example, there are 2 hotel sites in Trinidad and Tobago approved by the cabinet for hotel construction. In fact, there's 2, I think there are 3 of them. One in Tobago at Rocky Point, the site at south of Cape Hawk, there where the Ministry of Agriculture is today, and the tracking station site. These are sites that we deem to be available for hotel development. As a government, we would want to see construction on those sites of hotels, not necessarily done by the government, but because the state is the owner of these properties, the state could play a significant role in making these sites available for investments by the private sector. And it may even involve some element of state equity in it to create the structures. And if that happens, we can then market Trinidad and Tobago more as a convention location with our cultural things like carnival, and if we have more rooms and so on, become a bigger cruise ship destination and so on. If we build a hotel up at the tracking station, it becomes a unique kind of hotel where we market the easy access to the rainforest like Costa Rica. We can add to that deep sea fishing, down the islands fishing and so on. Perfect location. But it doesn't have to be a hotel built by the government. But the arrangements for doing that with the private sector for profit could be worked out by proper RFPs and transparent evaluations, and the cabinet takes a decision and there's money invested in a certain way, jobs to be created. Because if you look at the people in Carinajan district, where do they get opportunities to be employed in businesses that can be generated from more natural resources and what natural opportunities? The same thing with Tobago. We really should have a top-class hotel on Rocky Point. We want private sector involvement in the creation of a plywood industry in Trinidad and Tobago, using Guyanese wood chips, Trinidad and Tobago adhesives as a downstream from our current hydrocarbon industry. And instead of importing plywood from America, we should have the vision to want to export plywood to America, combining the strengths of Guyana and Trinidad and Tobago. That's the kind of thing we're talking about with government initiative and private sector initiative. Our private sector is awash with cash here, and what they need is the confidence in the marketplace and stability in government and ideas to be converted to action. We are taking it for granted that we have foreign exchange now, but not too far down the road, with an increasing requirement to service debt in foreign exchange. If we're not careful, earning foreign exchange would once again become the #1 priority in Trinidad and Tobago. And if we fail to earn the level of foreign exchange that we require to service the country and to service our debts, then the quality of life across the board will begin to deteriorate, because we need to expand the economy to bring about growth, and that growth is what will sustain our standard of living and create opportunities for the next generation and those who are present now looking for opportunities.
While you talk about those possible big ticket items, so to speak, what would be your attitude in terms of foreign direct investment? There's still a sense that some people don't get an opportunity to grow. How would you address that kind of gap, so to speak?
The most important thing is that there has to be fairness in the processes. And to have fairness, you have to have openness and transparency. It mustn't be that you get opportunity based on who you know, or you drink with the Prime Minister last night, or you contributed to the campaign and therefore nobody else can get ahead of you. All persons contributing must understand that what you're contributing to is good governance. You get a fair shot in an environment where you are treated fairly, and if your idea is good, it should grow and prosper, and you should benefit from the profits of those proceedings. In that environment, a stable government acting fairly for all is a requirement. In fact, some would say a necessity.
How would you address the expectations of young people?
If the economy is expanded in whatever way, it would demand these bodies, these trained personnel, whether they're in finance, whether they're in engineering, whether they're in accounts, in auditing, in construction, because there's a requirement for these bodies. There's a pull factor which creates participation. If the economy is stagnant or there's a loss of confidence, then there's a drying up of these opportunities. So it's like a pipe being clogged. You're generating these qualified people, but there's no pull factor for them into the marketplace. And more importantly, if the government is seen as the only feasible employer of personnel in the country, and OJT jobs and make work jobs are where the growth is, then the country is on a slippery slope. You want to create real jobs, good jobs in industry. Eh? And you have to agree what these industries are, and you have to mobilize the billions of dollars in our local banks. You have to mobilize those dollars into production. And that will only happen if the owners of that money are confident that the ideas and the support of the government and the infrastructure being built and the policies going ahead are policies that will stand the test of time.
There are some sectors of the populace who really must rely on government support. You talk about social programs now. Would you spell out some of those objectives?
Well, there will always be persons in the community in the foreseeable future who would need some element of support from the state. Whether it is a mother with children who, for one reason or the other, the mother is the only person, grandparents who age without having a provision in place to make sure they age with a decent amount of income to live decently in the community, whether the person has challenges of one kind or another, mental health challenge, physical disability, all of these things. So there will always be people who need that assistance, and the community doesn't begrudge that. In fact, they have a call on national assets like any other. What we have to do is to ensure that the allocations and provisions made for those people are directed to and reach those people. That's one of our first priority. Because if you look at the budget allocations, you will see we do not have a bad allocation. But to the extent that there's clamor for more and more of it, it largely has to do with misallocation, waste, and possibly corruption in some areas. So we need to review that and make the objective that what is allocated to these people, it reaches them and no other.
Do you think that Trinidad is ready for another Tobagonian to be leader of the country in the same path of, say, an A.N.R. Robinson?
I think this country is ready for a leader coming from wherever in the nation to provide the guidance and management that the circumstances warrant.
Dr. Rowley, are you ready to be the Prime Minister of Trinidad and Tobago?
From the time I accepted the job of being leader of the PNM and as opposition leader, that was an application for the job of Prime Minister. And with my experience and the work I've done and the political environment which exists now, and the requirement for Trinidad and Tobago to have new leadership, I think I can bring my attributes to bear and bring about the change that's required today. Yes, I'm ready.
Thank you, Dr. Rowley.